So welcome everyone to our Maximise ROI through DE&I webinar series. And welcome to our amazing speakers that we have today and our amazing co-host Molly. So what I want to do before we kind of kick in to everything today is talk to you a little bit about why we're here, what the webinar series is, and what we want to achieve throughout the course of this year through this 10-part webinar series. So Sourcebreaker are facilitating a conversation with experts in the DE&I space. Partnering with some of the greatest minds within the DE&I space in the recruitment industry who have some incredible insights on how staffing firms can be doing better and be doing more. Every single person and business that we've spoken to kind of in the process of the last few months is at a completely different point in their DE&I journey. And really what we want to do throughout the course of this is meet you where you are at your journey. So some people are right at the very beginning and maybe have just done some like diversity or unconscious bias training. And then there are some businesses who have done incredible and have a really authentic and intentional DE&I strategy. And we want to learn from everyone. And we are kind of from Sourcebreaker, myself, Molly and everyone in the team. We are very early in our journey, and so we are going to be learning along the process with this. And so no question, I hope, is a stupid question. I hope we're kind of asking the kind of questions that you guys who are listening would be asking as well. And it kind of leads very nicely onto the topic of today, which is why recruiters should care, why it's important, how it's going to actually impact you, your billings, and your relationships with clients, your internal relationships with your your colleagues. Just starting right at the very beginning. If you're not already on the DE&I bus, kind of as we're discussing it, this is the webinar that is explaining why you should get on, why it's really important, and why we feel so passionately about it as well. So I just wanted to introduce our speakers for today. So we've got Joe Major and Olivia Dodd. And Joe, I'm going to come to you first because you're left on my screen. And just a little bit of an introduction to yourself as well.
Okay, just to manage expectations, the greatest minds. Right. No, thank you for the intro, and I just need to be really, I know loads about recruitment and loads about inclusive and accessible recruitment, but I try not to use terms like experts, or I would never say I had a great mind. I just spend all my time thinking about this stuff. I'm working really hard to educate myself, and as long as I know more than my clients and I can support them, I'm happy with that. But yeah, every day, like I say, every day is a school day, even for folks within ED&I. So in terms of just really, really quickly, my background is the recruitment industry. I've been in this space for over 23 years. 17 and a half years on desk billing or as a billing manager. So it's not a million years ago since I was, actually at the coalface, doing the job and living the life of a recruiter. I was also a global sales trainer, so spent lots and lots of time equipping recruiters with sales skills. And then started my ED&I journey about 4 or 5 years ago. I'm still on that, the finished product. But I spend the majority of my time working with recruitment teams, both agency side and internally, to help them get to grips with ED&I, and also to equip them with the tools, the confidence and the knowledge to make what they do more inclusive, accessible and equitable. And to, just make that conversation a little bit easier for them and help them to break down those barriers that candidates who are marginalised and underrepresented face.
Absolutely. And it's so the kind of what you were saying at the beginning around, because I referred to you as the greatest mind in D&I. From my perspective and everything that I've spoken to you about, I always leave feeling very motivated and feel like it's very, so in my mind, you're one of the greatest minds. I know that
I'll take that, Ellie. I'll take it. I'm sure Olivia will as well.
And Olivia, I'll kind of go on to you next.
Thanks, Ellie. And I have to admit, Joe and I caught up yesterday and I did walk away feeling very motivated. So you are a great mind.
Likewise.
So I've been in the recruitment space for 10 years. Started out as a consultant, went into managing teams. My role now is still for a group of recruitment businesses, but my role is more on the technology side, sort of internally. But then I sort of have been involved with our DE&I committee for a number of years, but then kind of took the reins a couple of years ago. Something I'm very passionate about. I'm a woman of mixed heritage, so something that I can kind of speak from a personal perspective. But then we've gone on this incredible journey over the last couple of years. And I think you talked about bus stops and kind of on that journey. And we always talk about the fact that, and I have to be conscious that sometimes my language might be bus stop 6 and people are still at bus stop 1. And it's kind of, how can we get everybody wanting to get on the bus, I suppose. Yeah. So yeah, it's something that, you know, I've been really passionate about, something we've wanted to go on a journey with internally in our business so that we can be credible when we're then consulting with our client base about how they can think about recruitment in the most kind of inclusive way.
Molly, I'm going to come on to you and let you kind of introduce yourself as well. So Molly is on the customer success team at Sourcebreaker.
Yes, hi. Yeah, so I'm on the customer success team, onboarding specialist, and I joined in November, so I'm still very new to Sourcebreaker. Never been in recruitment before. My prior role was in apprenticeships for construction engineering. I've always been passionate about EDI, always. I think I was saying to Ellie, like, the more I talk about it, I could cry for hours and be like, okay, I'm going to change the world right now. And when I heard about this and Ellie was like, please get involved if you want to, I thought, I really don't feel like I should, because I know nothing about recruitment. I mean, I'm very passionate in my personal life about EDI, but I've never translated it to corporate, firstly. So I thought, actually, this is a perfect thing for me to do, because I'm pretty much at bus stop 1, like many listeners will be, especially if they're new to recruitment as well. So I'm really here to learn, ask some questions, hopefully give some input as well.
So we're here to kind of learn. And the first question I wanted to kind of throw out there, just for everyone that is listening, what is ED&I or DE&I or EDI or all the kind of combinations? What is it and what does it mean for recruiters? And Gerard, I'll come to you first.
Whenever I get asked this question, I always say, don't sweat the acronyms, right? You know, yeah. People will still correct me. I tend to say D&I because I say it thousands of times a day, and yeah. Sometimes it's just easier. For me, it's about really understanding what the words actually mean, not how you say them. I think the way that you approach it really, really matters. And the acronyms that we use don't always reflect the stages in which we should approach it. So whenever I talk about ED&I, DIE, DIEB, DEEIB, I always say, just try and visualize it in a way where the first step is equity. Right, so making sure that you're level in the playing field for everybody in your organization. That could be changing culture, values, behavior, policies, structure, benefits, salaries, all that kind of stuff. So get the equity piece right, so everybody is on a like equal footing, level playing field. If you get your equity piece right, which is the doing stuff, that's the really, really hard work. People should start to feel equal, and that's where your equality piece is. You can celebrate equality across your organization because everybody's on that level playing field. After that piece, people feel included. Okay, you've got your equity. Equality is prominent in your organization. People feel included, right? That's a feeling, isn't it? People can show up as they come. They don't feel like their identity, background, and circumstances affects their career progression and their salary and, you know, opportunities to grow and develop, the way that they're treated. So you've got that inclusion piece right. People then feel a sense of belonging, right? Belonging is critical, right? When people feel like they belong to an organization, they're more likely to stay. So your retention's better. Right, they're more likely to recommend other people, so it helps with recruitment. They're more likely to be more productive and more successful and more innovative and have more stuff to say and more ideas to bring to the table. So you get that sense of belonging, and that's where the magic happens. And then the diversity piece is the representation, right? Most of us work in organizations with stacks of diversity, but because we can't see it, we don't think it's there. But I'm sure that's the conversation for another question. But actually, if you fix it, if you have a great organization, underrepresented people will be attracted to your organization because you've got your culture and your values and your ethics and your structure and your behavior and your policies and your principles in order. So that's kind of like how I approach it when anybody asks that question.
Yeah, no, I love that. I absolutely love that. And Liv, is that similar to how you would describe it as well, or is there anything else you would add?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I completely agree with Jo. I think sometimes people think about D&I, DE, and whatever the acronyms are, and they kind of say, well, this isn't a conversation for me. And it's understanding what each of those words mean to you personally. So diversity isn't just your protected characteristics or the way that you look. You know, diversity is much deeper than that. There's diversity of thought. If you ask each individual, you know, what being in an inclusive workforce means to them, it gets them to understand what inclusion means in comparison to kind of the dictionary definition. And I'm glad that Jo was talking about the difference between equity and equality. You know, people use them interchangeably, which isn't quite right, but I do think that it's important to understand that, yes, sure, we can give people equal opportunities, but if they're not starting from the same starting point, it's not equitable. And that's actually, especially with recruitment, how we understand barriers to entry. So yeah, I think we as a business, we used to be D&I, and then we became DEI, and we included equity. Lots of people talk about belonging. I think it's just kind of how actually those definitions mean to individuals personally, rather than just a kind of a corporate way of talking about it.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And from a recruitment perspective, and as a recruiter, as an ex-recruiter, and as the kind of listeners of this, leaders and people that maybe are just joining in their recruitment journey, why is DE&I important? I guess we've got both sides of the coin that we definitely want to kind of touch on today. Is kind of, Jo, I know you mentioned like hearts and minds, but actually how top recruiters can leverage authentic and intentional DE&I to actually impact commercially, and then also from a personal, social level, kind of how it impacts. And so I think if we touch on commercials first, I know that everyone that's going to be listening here, it would be, you know, time is money, that kind of environment. And so I imagine that is going to be more important to, well, not necessarily more important, but yeah, something that's going to, I think, resonate a lot with the listeners. And I don't think actually many recruiters understand how much of an impact this can have on both sides of the coin. So Liv, I'll come to you kind of first on this one. What is the impact of DE&I within recruitment?
Yeah, sure. I think one of the things that we need to always think about as, you know, a recruitment industry is we're a really saturated market. And a lot of people give the same service to clients. And sometimes people forget the profound impact that you're having on people's lives, putting them into jobs. Something that, you know, has hugely changed over the last few years is actually people's motivations for wanting to move into different organizations. So, you know, originally a lot of it would be making sure you got a good salary. And I think ever since, you know, we've gone through the pandemic, people have started to really consider actually how they feel at work, making sure that they feel a level of being at home. As recruiters, we have this incredible, it's almost like being Cupid, right? You know, you're matching up organizations and individuals. If inclusion and, you know, thinking about diversity isn't kind of at the forefront of your mind, you're kind of doing your candidates a bit of a disservice as well as your clients. Look, it's really tricky because you will have a number of organizations saying to you, right, well, we've got a problem with a gender split, for example, in this particular space. So I will only accept shortlists from you that are 50% female. If you actually really want to get involved in this subject, you're then able to consult with your clients. You know, we're recruitment consultants. You're able to consult with your clients around, okay, well, look, the market actually is only 19% female. So let's talk about what we can do for your job here. Let's not make any tokenistic hires, but let's also talk about how we can be, you know, encouraging females into STEM subjects, for example, so that we do have a pipeline of people coming through. I also think as well that, you know, it isn't just making a quick buck. You know, there's a lot of competition out there now. And actually the value add that you can give organizations will mean that you are the number one player in your field, and will mean that you're the person winning retained work, for example, because you're using that kind of consultative approach. It is something that people should care about personally, and I know that we're going to come on to that later, but look, there is a commercial driver behind actually, yes, sure, you know, client, I'm going to find you the best person for the job, but the best person isn't the last person for the job. And let me consult with you about how I've got this group of talent, which you might not consider based on your job description, but actually how is going to make your business better in the long run. And let me show you how that could be a whole range of different people, not just what you think you want. So yeah, there's a you know, I think it's important for individuals within the recruitment industry to always want to be very inclusive in the way that they do recruitment. You know, Joe and I were in the recruitment industry, and I think it's changed hugely kind of in the last probably 5 years as well. You know, I wouldn't even go far back as saying 10 years. And it's making sure that when we talk about that equitable hiring piece, don't be the barrier to entry for individuals. Make sure that if you've got a candidate and, for example, you're not entirely sure how to pronounce their name, gone are the days when you just don't speak to that person. You pick up the phone and you say, look, I just want to make sure that I'm saying your name correctly, for example, and make sure that you are that person that is breaking down those barriers. And then commercially, obviously, it will do you well in the long run.
Joe, coming to you next on kind of, I guess, the same question.
Yes, so many important points there that Olivia mentioned. I talk a lot about how inclusive, equitable and accessible recruitment can build out a beautiful retained proposition, can help you absolutely nail those questionnaires that you get, you know, to stay on your PSLs and your MSPs, you know, that difference between basic consultancy and high level strategic consultancy that helps our clients build out high performing teams. It's an absolute game changer. And I think there's almost like this attitude sometimes from some recruitment business leaders that like D&I, ED&I, D&IB is just something that is, you know, it's almost like we don't need it because we don't have a problem. I mean, don't get me started on unpicking that, right? We'll be here all day. But it's seen as like this bolt-on, as this kind of like, you know, thing that you do when you have capacity or when you have time. And it's all just about, you know, fluffy stuff, CSR, you know, it's just on the shelf there. And when we've got time, we'll invest in it. And for me, my argument is always equitable, accessible and inclusive recruitment is incredibly good recruitment. So when I deliver training, I'm not reinventing the wheel, right? I am just going back to what recruitment may have been like when we hadn't automated everything, when we didn't have so much competition, when we didn't have, you know, things that, you know, plug and plays that just do our jobs for us. And I say, look, as a recruitment business, do you want to have more informed conversations with clients, have more credibility in front of clients, be able to take deeper job briefs, be able to help your clients build high-performing teams, which we know is directly linked to representation and diversity? Do you want to give your recruiters the skills and techniques to build out better job packs and put together incredible job advertisements that will make sure that you're not just writing checks out for tens of thousands of pounds on job boards that have no returning on investment? Do you want to up the ante with your personal branding and your social media presence? Do you want to increase the accessibility of your website? Do you want to make sure that you're talking to everybody in all your comms and PR? Do you want to include and increase and improve and enhance your candidate life cycle, your candidate experience? Do you want to improve your CV to interview ratios? Do you want to include your profitability? Do you want to make more money? Do you want to place more candidates? Yeah, right, okay. So ED&I has to be part of your strategic agenda. I mean, I could go on, right? But it doesn't sit aside. It should be part of what you do. And I think one of the reasons that, you know, speeding everything up is that, and automating everything is that we are just constantly putting out fires as recruiters. Yeah. And we've developed a cookie cutter approach that is very, very quick and makes us money really quickly. And we're not prepared to challenge the status quo, because it could, it could risk our levels of efficiency. And because of this behavior, people have become excluded. If you don't meet the exact profile that I can only work to because I haven't got the time and the resources to think outside the box, then you've got no chance. If you don't fit into this one size fits all process, I'm sorry, I'm just too busy. I'm too busy. I'm too important. I've got too many targets, too many KPIs. I've taken on too many jobs. I can't slow down, right? I can't slow down to be better. So yeah, that's my kind of, it's something that if you're not seeing this as a commercial gain, you're really missing a trick. Obviously, that's not what my work always centers around. For me, it's the human piece, but I'm sure we'll get onto that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think everything that you just said, if it doesn't resonate with a recruiter that's listening to this, if any of those answers were no to all those questions, then like that is just crazy to me. If it is a no-brainer, and like pushing out the question to you guys from the human level and from the real personal, social, moral level of DE&I. Joe, I'm going to come to you first, just because I feel like we're on a roll with kind of linking right into what you, off the back of what you were just saying there as well.
I think everything should be centered around making sure that you're leveling the playing field out for those whose backgrounds, identities, and circumstances create barriers. Often we've got a really limited lens on what life looks like. So I talked a lot to recruiters about this stuff. If you've never faced a barrier into work, if your identity and your background and your circumstances have never created any problems for you, or you're not aware of it, it's really hard for you to grasp that these problems are real everyday problems for millions and millions and millions and millions of candidates, right? Millions of candidates. Often when we think about diverse candidates, we're thinking about this really tiny group that we're not sure whether or not we can help. Right? We're talking about all women, right? We're talking about all people of color. We're talking about all people who have a disability. We're talking about all neurodivergent candidates. We're talking about all working parents. We're talking about all people with lifelong illnesses or conditions, right? We're talking about working parents. I mean, the list goes on, millions and millions of people. And as a recruitment industry, we control around 50 to 60% of the employment market, okay? So if we were to tomorrow say, right, as an industry, we will no longer accept prejudice or discrimination from our clients. We will make sure that everybody has access to the recruitment process. We will get rid of a one size fits all. I think we would solve our talent issues. And I think we would start to see a real change up in some of the damning data that we see around discrimination and prejudice. And the data's there, and the data's real, and it never gets any better. Whether you look at it in, 10 years ago, 5 years ago, yesterday, people face discrimination and prejudice every single day at work and in society because of who they are. And I think it's time for us as an industry to step up and go, not on our watch. That's not happening.
Absolutely. And Olivia, kind of off the back of that, anything that you would add, or kind of from your perspective from a human level?
I'm going to say the dreaded P word, privilege. I think what we have to understand is that privilege isn't a bad thing, and it's relative. And actually, whether you're a recruiter or an individual, we've got such an amazing privilege to be able to help other people. But that needs to start with us understanding how we can not just open the door for others, but hold it open. Sort of we're 4 women on this call. How many times have you got ready for work and gone, that's just a bit too much cleavage? How many times have we gone, actually, that skirt's probably a bit too tight to go to work? Who else has to think about that? The amount of time, my hair's straight today, so I'm probably doing myself a disservice, but the amount of times that I've gone into work and gone, I can't have my hair curly today because I've got a leopard print dress on and it might just be a bit too much. If you're not having to have those conversations with you on a day-to-day basis, you have to remember that other people do have to think about that. And actually, from a personal perspective, think about what inclusion means to you. Because inclusion is important to everybody, whether that's meaning, you get respect in the workplace or at home, whether that means you've got a voice and that voice is heard. All of those things mean something to every single individual. And DEI, D&I isn't just a conversation for, say, underrepresented groups. I once was running a workshop, actually, and one of the guys said, look, I just don't feel like I should be part of this conversation. He was like, I'm white, I'm heterosexual, I'm male, I'm able-bodied. And I was like, why? And then I asked him what inclusion meant to him. I think there's also a level of kind of that fluidity around our diversity. Joe was mentioning around, say, long-term health conditions. But imagine you go and play football tonight and you have a really bad injury, and actually then you suddenly have a disability and you have to face the discrimination that comes with it. We're not, just because you think you're a certain way doesn't mean you're suddenly hidden from the fact. But also diversity isn't just something that is physical. Our experiences and the way that we were brought up defines who we are today and who we're going to be in the future. And it's when you start to think about, it could be socioeconomic circumstance. It could be the fact that when you get home, you lock your door really quickly. It could be the fact that you're really scared to call the police because you don't know what, their reaction to you could be based on who you are as a person. These are kind of things that everybody, will deal with on a day-to-day basis. And this is a conversation for everybody. And I think if everyone gets on the bus, then that's when we really start to be able to kind of make a change.
Yeah, absolutely. What would you say is kind of, from working, Olivia, obviously within within recruitment organizations, and then Joe from a perspective of consulting with many different organizations as well. Is there any challenges that have come up against that you've found solutions for in terms of getting teams resonate with this and get people on the bus in your own business and organization?
I guess from my perspective, there's a few things. So the first challenge, and this happens really naturally, is we create echo chambers. If people are interested in this topic, they're the people that are going to be coming to, perhaps the workshops or listening to the webinars. I do think that there's a level of, inclusion training that needs to be mandatory across the business, but it doesn't need to be a level of, I'm forcing you into doing this and actually you're going to sit there and not pay attention. You kind of really need to make sure that you're relating it to everybody that's in the room. It's a really awful anecdote, but I once said it on a webinar a couple of years ago. I basically was saying how, if you walk outside and you really want it to be sunny, you're not going to start to kind of strip your clothes off if it's still raining. Yeah. And so the whole point is we can't allow people to share their experiences if the culture that they're surrounded in is still quite toxic. The other thing as well, and I've got some incredible leaders in my business who've sat down with me and just said, I am terrified to be part of this conversation in case I say something wrong. I think there's, making sure that there's a safe space for people to be able to say, do you know what, this isn't right, and this isn't making me happy, and I don't like this, and this is my personal circumstance. But also to kind of say, I'm going to ask something and it's going to sound a bit off, but I kind of want to learn. And it's allowing people to kind of have that learning. There's certain ways in which organizations should deal with certain circumstances. A really key thing for me, especially when we're running workshops, is we can never vilify people unless they're being discriminatory. Then they need a smack in the back of the head with a book. And I'm not condoning violence. But I do think that there's levels of, people will say things and they probably don't realize that they are being ignorant, and we need to bring them into the conversation so they get rid of that ignorance. But yeah, I think it is absolutely about getting everyone to be part of that conversation. I also think that it's really important for businesses to not say, right, we've got this topic that we need to talk about. You fit that category, you lead on it. I think we have to be really conscious to not push people into the spotlight and potentially make them relive trauma for the benefit of maybe teaching other people. We need to make sure that those spaces are safe.
When I'm working with clients, it's like, do you have a set of values? Look at your values and how can you weave ED&I into those values? And you usually can if you're prepared to do the work right. I've yet to meet more than 2 organisations who have inclusion as a value. We could argue that the reason for that is because values hold us accountable and they can really, really govern all of the work and the decisions that are made. So if we've got inclusion as a value, crikey, that's holding us to account, isn't it? So I think, definitely values need to come into the conversation. And I think that's how you get buy-in, because if you're an organisation where your values are non-negotiable, you live and breathe your values, if they're blended in and rooted in inclusion and equity and equality and all of that great stuff, then that's a brilliant platform to build on. And then just, I don't want to kind of like go on to, we've talked about this bit for quite a while, but I think Olivia also nodded to this, is nothing gets done unless it's driven by leadership, right? With all the will in the world, you might have the most incredible person leading ED&I. You might have a brilliant employee resource group, 50% of your business is up for it. And I talk about this a lot. And I think, Ellie, we've spoken about this. Yeah. ED&I work is change management, right? And the majority of an organisation does not have authority and permission and budget and resources and time to implement a change management project. The only people within an organisation who have authority to change behaviour, ethics, policies, cultures, behaviours, work structures, and all of that good stuff are the leadership team. And if you do not have your leadership team leading the work, and by leadership team, I mean people right at the top of this organisation, empowering others and giving permission and giving authority to the people doing the work, I think you're pushing water up a hill. I think you're not even at the bus stop, right? You're not even ready to get on. And I see this so often. I speak to amazing people who want to work with me, and I'm like, what's your budget? Haven't got any. What's your authority? Haven't got any. What's your attitude to change management? Oh gosh, they hate change. I'm like, right, okay, probably a bit more work to do before you bring me into your organisation.
Absolutely. Just to touch on that as well. So I think in that, there's some recruitment organisations and people have kind of the words of the values drilled into them just in case somebody in senior management stops them in the corridor, right? One of our sort of values is inclusion, and a big change that we made, and I would really encourage recruitment businesses to think about this, is your probation targets are no longer KPI and money driven. For us, your probation targets are, have you demonstrated behaviours against our values? So that's passion, expertise, integrity, and inclusivity. And if you haven't done that, you don't pass your probation. And I think recruitment businesses need to not just be led by who's making the most amount of money. Because if they're doing it, but they're a bit of a rubbish person, is that the kind of person that you want kind of leading from the front now?
I love that.
I love that as well.
I love it. I've got goose pimples. Like, yes, yes. I love everything your organisation are doing there. I'm your new number one fangirl.
That's a really great, transparent way as well of holding people accountable, but also just it's all above board. Like, we want inclusive people, so much so you can't pass probation if that's not demonstrated. And sometimes people skirt around D&I talking about it, but it's bang right there in your probation. It's part of your values, which is so cool. I love that. Absolutely.
We had somebody leave the business, and they wrote a Glassdoor review, and it was actually one of my favorite Glassdoor reviews that we've got, because, and this is definitely a conversation for another time in terms of language, but the guy had said, the business is too woke for me. And I was like, don't really like your phraseology there, but that's kind of a good thing.
I'll take that.
Like the best love story we've had. Even though it was negative, but yeah. So yeah, I think it's something that, and I think organizations need to have a, no tolerance approach to people not being inclusive. I think that's really important.
Yeah. And you've kind of both mentioned, you mentioned there's 2 companies that have got kind of inclusivity. I'm assuming Investigo might be one potentially, or if not, then there's 3. I want to kind of understand the businesses that that are doing DE&I authentically, intentionally, not tokenistically at all, and it is all very genuine. And you also mentioned like it is the excellence of recruitment. Like if you're doing that, then you're doing it really well. How are those businesses doing at the moment? What kind of impact have you seen actually when it's been done really well in an organization? What's been like the impact of that on the people of the organization?
I think this is probably one that Olivia should drive initially, because you've got the evidence, right? You're living and breathing the evidence every day.
I think the really key thing that we did as an organization is we started with our people. When Kelly and I took over the kind of the DEI strategy a couple of years ago, the first thing that we did, and while we call it our DEI committee, the first thing that we did is we made sure that the board understood that we were going to run this like a business unit. We need to have a hiring plan, we need to have a strategy, we need to have budget. And I think that's really important for sort of organizations to think about when they're underpinning it. And we released a survey, and it was called Identifying Who We Are. And it has 3 sections to it. The first part was specifically around asking people about protected characteristics, because that's what people are used to filling in on kind of government forms. And we also wanted people to understand why protected characteristics exist. A key thing, because I think there are many people that you say protected characteristics and they don't know why they are things. And the whole point is the fact that to a particular group of people, once upon a time, something really bad happened to them. So it was written into statute that it was illegal to discriminate against them. And that's where we start to see these kind of tick box forms. The second part of the survey asked people to write a couple of sentences about how they identify themselves. And what I mean by that is we are not defined by our protected characteristics. And I tell you what, it was so interesting, because you'd get people kind of saying, I'm a father. They wouldn't necessarily say I'm a man, or I've come from this particular background and I'm striving to do this in the future. People talk about themselves in terms of a storyboard. And then the final thing that we asked them to do is talk to us about what policies and benefits do you want to see? Because, and this is why representation is really important. You can have teams of people that are really passionate, but we have to have the representation, because otherwise you just don't know. Like, we don't know what we don't know, right? And off the back of that, we then kind of released the results of the survey. So we understood the makeup of our business. We then made sure that any strategy that we were leading on from a DEI perspective was led by the people that we knew we had in the business. We made sure that, the DEI kind of committee wasn't this exclusive group and, we're kind of above all of you. It was very much come in and bring ideas and get involved and come and learn. So we went from, I think, 8 people when we first took it over to we're now at 46. So it's 10% of our global workforce. So we know that we've got that level of representation that we need across the group. And then we hired somebody to do a review of every single policy that we had in the business. So since then, we've enhanced our maternity leave, our paternity leave, our shared parental leave. We've got a policy specifically for people that are transitioning. We started to really focus on actually what do our people want, not what do we think they want and what do we think that we can have a tick box for. It was really important to me that we weren't a performative organization. And it's really easy to become that, especially when you go, right, well, this is something that we need to do. So what shall we do? And I think in order to be really successful, organizations need to speak to somebody like Joe, who can really consult them on that journey, rather than them kind of going, okay, well, I've read this article and it says that I need to do this, and then we're just going to say that DEI is our number one priority as a business. There's an awful statistic it said something like 93% of CEOs said that in 2023 DEI was their number one priority. I was like, yeah.
Sorry, what?
And it was kind of like, okay, but actually the fact that was listed as a statistic, I'll get my words out, was even more worrying, because it's kind of then saying there are people that are just saying, yeah, we'll care about this.
Mm-hmm.
Or let's throw some money at something, and then never actually implement anything. So success has to be kind of driven by everybody getting involved, everyone having a say. But then I think, to Joe's point, the really key thing is the leadership have to show that they're genuinely and authentically behind this. And it shouldn't just be I really care about this now, I've had a couple of daughters. It should, it should be, actually, these are the people that are making our business run. And we need to make sure that everyone is coming to work and feeling like they belong, for example. There's so much lost talent out there because organisations are wrong. So much. Sorry, I waffled a bit there. It's something I'm very, very we need to make sure. Right.
I completely agree. And every time both of you are speaking, and I can see me and Molly are both just like, yes, this is exactly tell everyone, we need to let everyone know. And I think one of the final questions I wanted to ask was, we've spoke a lot around why recruiters should care, why it's so ridiculously important from a commercial side, from a human element, really kind of start to look at what businesses can actually start doing to be really active, and not just say, I definitely care, but not really doing the work that is required to make the change behind it. The final question was inspired by the Hill We Climb poem by Amanda Gorman. Is it Gorman? Yeah, Gorman, the National Youth Poet Laureate, who I think was at Joe Biden's inauguration speech, I think. And part of the and this actually, again, another shout out to Chikere Ibokwe, her book club is the one of the poems that we read there. Part of that poem was around inaction and how inaction is inherited, and the legacy, and how, I think one of the lines was their blunders or our blunders become their burdens, and all around kind of if we're not doing anything right now, then the next level of leadership have got an awful long way to go. And if they don't do anything right now, then it was almost kind of around how, inaction is inherited, basically. And one of the questions I wanted to ask you guys was, what is the risk of not doing anything? And I know we've kind of touched on it around what the reality is of where we're at right now, and the discrimination that is being faced by candidates, and the impact that is having on people and representation, and actually belonging. And then also from the commercial side, is there anything kind of that you would mention around if people aren't doing anything now, or they aren't being active in their actions and kind of putting their money?
I don't think you're gonna have a business in 10 years. You certainly won't have a high performing, profitable, innovative, forward thinking business that's developing products and services that people want. And I think if we look at this from a political perspective, which I don't often do, but our government right now is doing pretty much nothing for the people that face barriers, right? The Equality Act isn't cutting it.
Yeah.
So this is with everything that's happening in society in 2023, organizations have the power to step up to the plate, right? The government doesn't want to do anything, right, to protect the trans community. We can take the place of these crappy policies and this lack of progression and moving backwards in social policies and employment policies, and we can be the change. We can step up to the mark and make sure that you might not be doing anything, but we're going to do something about it. We're going to push for change. I think more and more organizations, despite the research that people love to produce research to push against the argument for ED&I, don't they? I'm like, who's doing this? What is in it for them to come out with research that tries to unpick the business need for it? I just kind of don't get that. But regardless of any new research that's been published, every millennial or every Gen Zer and everybody with a social conscience, regardless of where, you know, of the generation, wants to work for an employer that cares about them, that cares about other people, and wants to create a great environment that represents the society that we live in. And people are looking at that, they're looking for the receipts, right? They are considering representation, they're considering commit policies, working environments, behavior, ethics, all of that stuff before they even decide to submit their CV.
Yeah.
So if we don't step up, right, if we don't take action, if we don't see this as a commercial, strategic part of our organization, I think we're going to struggle with retention. We're not going to be able to meet our clients' expectations and be there for our clients strategically and commercially. And we are going to continue to struggle to fill our jobs and also attract the types of people that we want to fill our businesses with that future-proof us. That's my contribution to that. Sorry, my dog has been very naughty.
Don't even worry. I had to get my mum to take my dog on a walk between 10 and 11 today because I know what he's like.
I love your dog, Ellie.
I know, he makes an appearance quite a bit.
Just on that, I would, completely agree with Jo. There's something that I talked about. It was to a group of CIOs actually. I talked about, organizations think about filling their capability matrix with people rather than thinking about the capabilities that those people can bring. If you do nothing, and as an organization, you don't make it that you've got an inclusive environment for people to come in, people will just speed past you. The level of, and it's the diversity of thought, right? That's what we need in our businesses. And you can't get that if everyone is the same. You need to have, and I think this is another thing, Jo wrote an amazing post on LinkedIn about this phrase diverse talent. I always say diverse just means not homogenous. It's not, well, you're that way and you guys are diverse. I think organizations that, and this is probably from a personal level, organizations that don't do anything about this and don't try and, think about the behaviors in their businesses. We haven't talked loads about specific discrimination. I know that will be something that we talk about later on in the series, but remember, there's lots of discrimination that is disguised as banter. And in recruitment businesses and in sales businesses, we are banterous organizations. And there's not one part of me that's sat here going, we need to be clinical and completely be PC all the time, because you just know that's not going to happen. But if you don't stand there as an organization and say, just think about the way that you maybe are at work, you don't know who's going home one night going, today was really, really crap. You don't know the people that you're not then going to see perform because actually they don't like speaking in front of their colleagues, or they don't like, being part of those kind of atmospheres. There's that key phrase, which is, treat people how you want to be treated. And I push that back in sales organizations. You treat people how they want to be treated, because the level of banter, for example, that you can take isn't what other people can take. And if organizations don't do this, you will just be fostering like toxic workforces and toxic places to work. And yeah, sure, that might kind of work for some organizations, but they'll never grow. They'll never have happy people. Yeah, sure, they might make a good bit of money, but have you been happy, and have you realized that you've done something, correct with your life? people go into recruitment because you can earn loads of money, and people have earned so much money over the last couple of years. Like, the market's been amazing, but we now really need to focus on the fact that we are still workforces and organizations, and, you know, people are even working in a hybrid way. You know, recruitment businesses are high performing, but it can be really stressful for people. And actually, if the well-being of your people, led from an inclusive perspective, isn't number one on your agenda, you're not going to go anywhere.
Or you're not going to do as well as you could do.
Yeah.
That's the thing, isn't it? We think we're successful, but then it's just scratching the surface, isn't it? We've got, you know, like, homogenous group of people all making loads of money. One of the number one costs for recruitment business is recruitment and retention.
Yeah.
And it, you know, and yet we think we're doing all right, but we could do better. We could do loads better.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. There's so much more. There is so much more, and the potential in the, like I said, around scratching the surface. If everyone did what you guys have just suggested over kind of the last hour or so around what we could be doing, and actually the massive impact that makes on retention and growth, and then everything would lead to profitability, but through authentic and genuine and intentional DE&I, rather than the tokenistic side that maybe is kind of coming across some companies at the moment. Amazing. So I'm very conscious of time, and I want to make sure that you guys can get off to, you've got very, very busy days, and I really appreciate your time today. The next webinar will be on the kind of 10 fundamental, like the foundations of what you need to start building a DE&I strategy. So we can go into a little bit more depth of the actual practical steps that we can take on the next webinar. So please join us on that one as well. And a big thank you to Joe and Olivia and Molly for joining us today. And I really appreciate all your time massively. And yeah, thank you very much.
Pleasure. Thank you.